They claimed the royal arena smelled of roses and myrrh, but no scent could hide the truth within those walls. In the perfumed silence of Persepolis, a 15-year-old girl knelt as servants anointed her with oils meant for queens. They called this the greatest honor for any woman in the empire. She knew the lie. Her hands shook, not from the cold air drifting down marble halls, but from the truth she couldn't speak. She wasn't scared to die. Death was kinder than her fate. Guards called her princess, but titles meant nothing here. To the men she would meet, the men worshipped as a god, she was just property. They say the body never lies. Hers did. Her shoulders slumped under a weight no one saw. Her lips pressed tight, her eyes hollow, as if she'd lived 40 years, not 15. She had given up on dreams long ago. Before we go further, support this small channel. Please like and subscribe for more dark history. To understand why the King of Kings turned on his own blood, we must go back to the start of his empire and his growing madness. Xerxes was born in 519 BC, into an empire spanning 3 continents. Persia stretched from the Indus River to the edge of Greece, from Egypt's hot sands to the Caucasus's cold peaks. 50 million people obeyed his father, Darius, who ruled from palaces of stone and gold. When Xerxes was born, priests declared him chosen by Ahura Mazda, god of light. They didn't raise a boy, they raised a god. At the royal school in Susa, Zoroastrian teachers repeated the same lessons daily. You are divine. Your thoughts are sacred. Your will is law. They never taught humility. They taught absolute power. Every feast, every ritual reinforced it. At dawn, servants sang hymns to his name. At meals, nobles tasted his food to show loyalty. Even how people approached him, never turning their backs, never meeting his gaze, told him he wasn't human. When a child grows up believing he's a god, compassion feels like a flaw. His mother, daughter of Cyrus the Great, deepened this corruption. She had seen families torn apart by betrayal, brothers poisoning brothers. She whispered to Xerxes, "Only total control keeps you safe." That lesson hardened him. He learned that love must be owned, that loyalty must be enforced by fear. By 20, when his father died and he became king, Xerxes believed the empire was his body, its people his blood. Provinces and persons were the same, both existed to serve him. His early rule was marked by conquest. He crushed rebellions in Babylon with such brutality his own generals winced. In Egypt, temples burned, scribes were killed, rebels left on stakes along the Nile as a warning. The message was clear: defy him, and not even the gods would save you. But his real test came when he looked west, to Greece. For Xerxes, this wasn't just war. It was theology. Beating Greece would prove he was divine. He ordered a bridge of ships across the Hellespont so his army, nearly 1 million strong, they say, could march over the sea. When storms destroyed the bridge, Xerxes did the unbelievable. He commanded his men to whip the sea with chains, to punish it for defying him. He threw shackles into the waves and declared the ocean his slave. To his followers, this was divine power. To others, it was madness. Then came Salamis. The Persian fleet burned on the dark water. Months later, at Plataea, his army was crushed. For the first time, the man who called himself immortal tasted failure. And when a god realizes he can bleed, he doesn't become human. He becomes something far more dangerous. Xerxes returned to Persepolis in 479 BC. The victory parades ended. The great feast stopped. He no longer met with foreign messengers. Courtiers whispered that his eyes had changed, always watching the shadows, as if he expected betrayal with every step. His orders grew unpredictable. He killed architects for picking the wrong tile color, had generals skinned alive for questioning him. His empire, once led by strategy, now bent to his paranoia. But the worst change happened behind the 15-meter walls of the imperial arena. What began as a royal tradition, the harem, became an obsession. Inside that walled maze lived 360 official concubines and countless slaves from across the empire. Girls from Egypt, Babylon, Lydia, India. Each month, new ones arrived in gilded carts, chosen for beauty, not family. The arena was a world of its own, a prison dressed as a palace. Its marble baths shone under golden lamps, but its windows were barred. The smell of jasmine hid fear. No woman who entered ever left. Eunuchs guarded the gates. Even generals were forbidden. Only Xerxes walked freely, wrapped in silks and silence. From this gilded cage, daughters were born. Dozens, maybe hundreds, but they were invisible in royal records. They weren't acknowledged as princesses, their names never carved in stone. They lived as shadows, children of the god-king, raised to know their bodies belonged to him. Years later, a palace guardian, Mithrates, would whisper to conspirators about what he saw inside. His words would end Xerxes' rule and stain his name forever. He said the end began in 471 BC, 6 years after Greece humbled the empire. That year, the emperor crossed a line so horrible even his closest advisors stayed silent. At the center was a girl just 12 years old, raised with royal manners. She carried herself like nobility. Her eyes were green like jade, her hair black as night, her face strangely like her grandmother's. That likeness woke something in Xerxes beyond reason. Court officials called it divine fixation. Others called it madness. From that moment, the empire's most powerful man spiraled into a darkness no priest could cleanse. What he did next would make even his enemies pity Persia's royal blood. The meeting was prepared as if for the gods. Every move, every breath inside the arena followed a sacred ritual. Servants in white moved silently, eyes on the floor, repeating gestures learned over generations. The girl was told she would take part in a divine ceremony, vital for the empire's balance. No one told her the truth. That night changed the emperor forever. The men who once led armies, who dreamed of uniting the world, never left that room. What emerged was colder. Someone set on proving that even as his empire weakened, his power was absolute. This was never about desire. It was about domination, the point where greatness and cruelty merge and devour everything. By 468 BC, Xerxes' reign was a shadow of its past. The palace, once a symbol of order and splendor, now pulsed with quiet fear. Inside, a new order emerged, strict, cruel, and carefully managed. The young women of the arena were listed like treasure from conquered lands. Their names, ages, and features filled scrolls kept in cedar boxes. The most favored were for the emperor. The rest were traded like coins, given to governors, envoys, and nobles in exchange for loyalty. Childhood didn't exist here. There were only levels of service. The arena's guardians, led by senior eunuchs, created a system as detailed as the armies. They recorded every meeting, kept schedules, managed perfumes, oils, and medicines. Nothing was left out. What happened behind those golden doors was treated with the same care Persia used for taxes or troops. The mothers, locked in nearby rooms, could do nothing. Some resisted and vanished. Others broke, losing their minds in silence. Most learned to survive by looking away. Yet the daughters suffered most. They grew up where obedience was holy and fear was seen as faith. Their language had no words for what was done to them. They lived in emotional exile, hiding inside themselves. Their bodies told stories they couldn't speak. Hunched shoulders, shaking hands, faces empty of life. Some never spoke again. Others laughed without control, as if madness was the only escape. Xerxes watched this decay like a man seeing his reflection in a broken mirror. His eyes held no warmth. What he wanted wasn't pleasure. It was submission. He had lost Greece, but within Persepolis' walls, he found new lands to conquer, the minds and spirits of those who couldn't fight back. Artabanus, captain of the royal guard, saw the empire's fall up close. His job kept him near the inner palace, though he could never step in. He later wrote that at night, Persepolis sounded like a temple of despair. A mix of muffled cries, quiet prayers, and silences that hurt more than screams. The empire smelled of incense and rot. But it wasn't the death of enemies that haunted him. It was the death of a civilization rotting from the inside. Absolute power needs helpers, and Xerxes had many. The Persian elite knew they feasted under gold ceilings while pretending not to know. They justified their silence not with loyalty, but with self-interest. Many profited directly: new lands, tax breaks, political marriages sealed with favors from the arena. Corruption became the empire's second religion. Even the Zoroastrian high priests, meant to guard moral order, gave divine approval for the king's sins. From the fire altars of Persepolis, they declared that the King of Kings ruled not just men, but all creation. To challenge him, even in his home, was to defy Ahura Mazda himself. Some priests went further, saying the royal daughters were part of the emperor's sacred self, vessels of his divine light. To oppose his will was heresy. Court doctors added their own layer of guilt. They made herbal drinks and creams to hide bruises, dull pain, erase signs of the rituals. Reports were written in coded medical terms so no outsider understood what was treated. Everything was done quickly, quietly, efficiently. But the worst betrayal came from within. The older daughters, women who had lived through the same fate, helped prepare the younger ones. They combed their hair, applied the oils, repeated the same comforting lies once told to them. They didn't act from cruelty, but from despair. To join was to survive. To refuse was to die. In that twisted world, family became a tool for control. The cycle of abuse fed on its own pain, repeating itself through fear and hopelessness. Mithrates, the chief guardian of the arena, the men who would later confess everything, kept mental notes of every night, every ritual, every disappearance. He said the emperor's hunger wasn't for pleasure, but for proof. Each cruel act reminded Xerxes he still controlled fate, that he was still a god in a world that had shamed him. In his later confession, Mithrates remembered dozens of young women scarred or erased in those final years. Some vanished completely. Others lived on in silence, ghosts behind silk curtains. It was never about lust, he said. It was a starvation, an endless need for control. By 466 BC, fear spread through the upper ranks. Artabanus had seen enough. He gathered nobles who had also witnessed the horror. They called it a conspiracy, but it was really self-defense. They feared not divine anger, but infection. The idea that Xerxes' madness could reach their own homes, that their wives and daughters might be next. Their plan was simple. During the New Year festival, when the king was alone for his nightly meditation, they would strike. Artabanus and his men would slip through the inner gate, kill him quickly, and make it look like ritual suicide. No talk of justice, only stability. The empire had to survive, even if the truth didn't. But Xerxes wasn't just paranoid. He was prophetic in his distrust. He saw betrayal in every glance, treachery in every whisper. Servants disappeared for smiling too long. Ministers were executed for speaking softly. He had turned Persepolis into a maze of fear. In his last months, he refused to leave the arena. Surrounded only by eunuchs and trembling women, he trusted no one else. The air inside grew thick with incense and dread. Then came the night of August 4th, 465 BC. Xerxes chose his youngest victim yet, an 11-year-old girl who wasn't yet a woman. For weeks, he had her watched, waiting for her body to change, for the moment she would be ready. The palace was silent that evening, the kind of quiet before disaster. What happened next would end an empire and carve Xerxes' name into history, not as a god, but as a warning. That night, impatience finally overcame caution. Artabanus and his conspirators had waited for weeks, watching for any break in the emperor's routine. When they learned Xerxes would visit the arena alone, guarded only by eunuchs who stayed outside the chamber, they knew it was their only chance. The guards, following sacred rules, were forbidden from entering once the divine ritual began, leaving the tunnels under the kitchens unguarded. Artabanus led his men through those narrow passages, where the smell of cooked meat mixed with old incense. They moved in silence, armed with daggers, not swords. There would be no second try. When they reached the emperor's private room, they saw what no one should see. Xerxes, the king of kings, the living god of Persia, was naked, sweating, holding down a small girl who cried without sound. His face was unrecognizable, a twisted mask of madness and obsession. Years of unlimited power had wiped away whatever humanity was left. His swollen body showed his indulgences, his hands slick with his own child's blood. For a moment, even hardened soldiers froze. The image of the divine ruler was replaced by a beast. Artabanus moved first. He stabbed once, straight through the ribs, into the emperor's heart. Xerxes turned, eyes wide, not with pain or fear, but disbelief. He looked at his killer as if the world had betrayed him. His last words, later recorded by Artabanus, were chilling, "But I am God." The second blade cut his throat. The third was unnecessary, a final act of anger that tore through his stomach. The King of Kings fell across the girl's small body, his royal blood mixing with hers on the cold marble floor. The conspirators lifted his body, washed the wounds, and laid him in his ceremonial bed. They placed his hands as if in prayer, lit the sacred fire, and told the court the emperor had died peacefully during his nightly talk with Ahura Mazda. The lie became truth before sunrise. The empire couldn't handle a scandal. By morning, there was a new king, Artaxerxes I, son of Xerxes. His first act was to seal the arena forever. Publicly, he said it was to honor his father's sacred memory. Privately, he wanted to erase every trace of the nightmare that had rotted Persepolis' heart. The surviving women were quietly moved to other palaces across the empire. Many were quickly married to local nobles. Others were sent to temples to live as priestesses. None stayed in Persepolis. Their names never entered the royal records. No poet sang for them. No historian wrote of their pain. They became the invisible dead, forgotten by history. Remembered only by stone. The eunuchs who had served in the arena were quietly killed. One by one, they were executed for made-up crimes. Theft, blasphemy, conspiracy. Really, they were silenced because they knew too much. Mithrates, the last guardian, was allowed to live just long enough to write a confession. His words, hidden for centuries, would surface long after Persia was dust. Xerxes' body was preserved according to Zoroastrian custom and buried in the royal tombs at Nakshi-Rustam, carved into the cliff. The tomb still stands, with inscriptions praising him as King of Kings, protector of the weak, beloved of the divine light. But the walls say nothing of the daughters he destroyed. The lives erased for his ego. No word of the horrors behind the golden curtains. No trace of the girls who died nameless in his palace. For 2,000 years, history remembered Xerxes for something else entirely. His failed war against Greece. Greek writers like Herodotus mocked his pride, retelling his defeats at Salamis and Plataea. Later, Persian historians downplayed his rule, calling it a simple bridge between Darius and Artaxerxes. No one mentioned the arena. No one spoke of the girls. And that silence may have been Xerxes' final victory, to have done such terrible things that even time helped bury them. But stone doesn't forget. In 1931, French archaeologists digging in the ruins of Persepolis found something the official records never mentioned. Under the marble floors of the royal harem, they discovered an underground room filled with human bones. Hundreds of small skeletons, most from girls aged 10 to 12. Many showed signs of repeated injury and long confinement. Some missed limbs. Others had been deliberately hurt. Among the rubble, bits of jewelry and pieces of perfumed jars remained, a grim reminder of beauty used to decorate suffering. Lab tests confirmed what Mithrates had confessed centuries before: the King of Kings not only enslaved and harmed the girls in his palace, but killed them when they were no longer useful. The royal harem wasn't a sanctuary. It was a killing ground hidden under silk and gold. Even today, when tourists walk among Persepolis' ruins and admire its great columns and detailed carvings, few know what lies beneath their feet. The stone art celebrates victory, order, and divine power. But under those stones is a mass grave, a silent message that behind the glory of empires often lies the pain of the powerless. This is the untold story of Xerxes I, the so-called King of Kings. Not the one taught in schools, full of battles and monuments, but the one written in the blood of his own daughters. He wasn't just an emperor beaten by Greece. He was a man destroyed by his own belief he was a god. And this is how civilizations die. Not with swords or sieges, but when moral rot eats them from within. Because when a kingdom is built on suffering, its strength is a lie. Sooner or later, it collapses under the weight of the pain it tried to hide. Today, in the quiet ruins of Persepolis, among the broken carvings and shattered stairs, the echoes of those forgotten girls seem to whisper through the dust. Their voices say what no inscription ever did, that the true legacy of tyrants isn't the monuments they build, but the lives they ruin. And no matter how many years pass, cruelty never truly vanishes. It leaves marks in the stones, in the bones, and in the memory of those willing to look deeper. If this story troubled you, share it. Because silence protects monsters. And when we forget the crimes of the past, we risk making new ones today. If you think these forgotten voices should be heard, subscribe to this channel. Here, we uncover the stories official history tried to silence.